The ego is the system that runs your sense of self. It is made out of thought patterns, emotions and behavior loops, and the stories that try to hold it all together. Left unchecked, it creates endless existential searching, chronic disconnection, and the persistent sense that something is wrong. The goal of my videos is clarity, to see your identity and its contradictions for what they are, named precisely, to finally understand what it is that we're all running away from. A useful way to look at consciousness is to think about consciousness as a physical field. And you might even say that this field has multiple dimensions, like 5 dimensions or 6 dimensions, like a very weird geometrical ball. And depending on how it is configured, your experience changes. Meaning that every single part of your conscious field or your conscious experience would be mappable in some sort of, geometrical space. And then a certain geometrical space causes the sensation of air, causes the sensation of light hitting your eye, and all these different configurations that exist. Now, I think this is a very reasonable way to frame it. Maybe people get lost a bit when I say 5D or 6D shapes, because we don't really have a good way to symbolize them, but there are some virtual ways to look at, for example, 5-dimensional DMT spaces, or some other maps that people have drawn out. So it's not that weird. The reason I think it's important to look at it this way is because it objectifies consciousness a bit. Because you might say that consciousness doesn't actually exist because we don't really have a real working model for it. But I find this model is kind of useful because it objectifies something that people would normally call subjective. So if you have a subjective experience of water hitting your body and now you are getting wet, then this needs to map onto something objective, because it is actually something that is happening that causes a sensation. And if this is true, then you can objectify all subjective experiences, meaning that there's no person and no animal, and likely no insect for that matter, that doesn't have a real objective physical space in which its experience is happening. And to me now this is kind of obvious, but it took me a lot of time philosophically to get to the space, because I always felt like subjective experience couldn't be objectified. But intuitively we understand this is not the case, because when we interact with other people, we care for their feelings, and we care that they're having a nice time when they're around us, and we also care about their reflection of our own consciousness shape. And this is where we start to interconnect with each other and start to notice that we're actually mirroring each other all the time, and we're influencing each other all the time. And without actually knowing if the other person has a conscious experience, meaning that you assume that I'm also alive. I mean, now since this is a YouTube video, I could literally be generated AI, but let's put this equation out of the side. I'm not AI. But you assume that I'm a real human being that has its own internal conscious experience, and you assume it to a degree where you are certain of it. Like, it doesn't even come to mind that you would question the conscious experience of another person. This only happens when the ego dissolves to a certain point that it starts to feel like it might actually be the only thing in the universe. And then you get into like a sort of solipsistic groove where you believe that you are actually the only being that exists in the universe because the ego doesn't exist and everything is consciousness. And there's, a lot of depth to this idea. But I also think it misses the point, because it is clear that other human beings, or like other beings for that matter, have their own internal experience. And to then say that you and everybody else are literally the same person has like some deep empathetic wisdom to it, but is not what is actually happening. What is actually happening is that you are a certain knot that has configured itself into your current configuration. And you literally are this knot that has configured itself into your configuration. This means that you are the only you that exists right now. Like, there's no other version of you but the one here right now, objectified into all of these conditions. And then looking at consciousness this way also helps to kind of remove the delusions that we have around free will and around control. Because now you might see that the same way the universe has been built through a ton of stars and chemical processes and physical processes and gravity colliding and creating all these, physical laws, and then kind of made everything happen almost in a sort of, accidental way where one domino leads to the other, and then suddenly there are humans and look at us, right? And then you can see that the intelligence that your consciousness is made out of is pretty much interconnected with the entirety of the physical field. And this means that consciousness isn't really that different of a phenomenon than any other phenomenon in reality, because one came from the other and they are all interconnected. And this is also where this idea comes from, that all our conscious experiences are interconnected and that you are literally, in a meaningful way, all people on earth. As long as you believe that we are all in one reality and this is reality, then you cannot really remove yourself from another person's consciousness in some ultimate way. Like, you must be somehow interconnected if you can see the other person and the other person can see you, and if you're influencing each other, and if both, or like everybody, hasn't really decided to be here. So we're all a process of this domino effect and playing out. Now, all of this is important to realize for oneself, because it gives you the ability to be very much interconnected with all conscious phenomena. So you don't bias certain pleasant experiences over negative experiences, and you don't bias certain negative experiences over pleasant experiences, meaning that you can see that they all emerge from the same field, and it's not that one part is unacceptable and the other is acceptable. Everything needs each other in order to work how it works. And consciousness has the quality to anneal, which basically means to inject with energy and then restructure parts of itself that feel uncomfortable. For example, if you have pain in your leg, then it's like consciousness is constricting itself in this position, and it's giving this sense that something needs fixing. And then the body, through its natural intelligence, fixes the pain in the leg. And in the same way, if you have some sort of experience in your conscious field that is uncomfortable or full of suffering, then there will naturally be an attention moving you to it, which also means there will naturally be a desire to fix it and to mend it, to remove the tension and integrate again in the entire system, which is also called neural annealing, which gets facilitated through meditation, because you inject energy into the structure, therefore the structure gets loosened, and then it can reform again into something new. That's why psychedelics give also these deep perceptual shifts when you take them. And then the sense of spirituality is often the sense of the ego changing its shape or shift form. And from there, you notice that everything really is a physical system. It's just that some aspect of physics is not really discoverable or scientifically verifiable, because our current scientific tools or measurements don't really reach far enough to understand it. But everything that I'm saying can be observed in your own experience, and the model maps. And in a way, everything that you say is always a map, because it's not the actual thing, right? I'm trying to communicate something very, very abstract to you. But I believe that if we were to actually, have a way to understand what consciousness really is, then we will find that it is, in fact, a field, and that there's nothing that isn't part of that field, which is why we call it reality. And that this field moves over long periods of time towards harmony, which we experience as well-being or love. And it is kind of trippy to think about it, but if this is true, then it implies that there's a sort of goal embedded into the structure of reality. There's a certain exploratory nature to the entire thing. Like, reality wants to explore what it is capable of, but has a certain mechanism in it that moves towards well-being and wants to move away from suffering, while also leaving space for suffering to be possible and to exist. Now, if you model reality the way I've just modeled it, in the last, 10 minutes, then it comes to the point where you kind of have to admit that there's a certain objective morality emerging here. And a lot of people don't want to bite the bullet on that because it's uncomfortable. But the objective morality then would say that unnecessary suffering is evil. So all sort of constriction within the conscious field where it's causing itself to hurt and not move towards harmony is a problem. And this problem needs fixing. And we understand this intuitively with our own body. When we are hurting, we want to fix it. But if we then also see reality as one field, now we are also inclined to make the world a better place. Now the suffering of other people is somewhat also our own issue. And I know there are a lot of problems here too in oneself, where people get kind of like a savior complex that who wants to save the world and stuff like this. That can also be kind of its own like tension that needs to be resolved. But besides that, the desire to have a positive influence over yourself and the people around you is truly meaningful. It is truly a shift within the physical object of the conscious field towards harmony. And it always starts with yourself. To find whatever is causing a knot and tension within your own conscious field and finding how to solve it. It is an objective way to look both at subjective experience and suffering and the nature of existence as a whole. Because now everything is united. Nothing is excluded. Even if somebody might be wrong about something, they're still part of the field. And therefore, you kind of must also care for them. If you don't, then what you're doing is you're basically rejecting this part of the field and pretending that it's not part of it, which is called denial, which is also, called delusion. And this is what we humans do, but within our own fields. We have parts that are tense and uncomfortable, and we pretend that they are not there. And this is how we suppress anxiety and suppress the fear and suppress the sadness. And to lose these knots is quite uncomfortable because it requires you to look at all of the stuff that is, uncomfortable to look at. But only by putting your attention to where your system isn't completely harmonic, you'll find yourself into a more harmonized place. And this harmony will radiate out towards, people around you, which is a bit indirect, right? Like if you are living in a toxic environment and you become very happy, people around you might actually want to affect you with their own dissonance instead of taking in your own harmony. But overall, as a whole, the happier and more content you can make yourself, the more you can make happy and content the entirety of the conscious field. And I find this is a very noble thing to aim at.